Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I am Audrianna Delagrange. I'm the Vice President of KDP. And today we have with us the president or the principal of Snider High School, Mr. Chad Hissong. Mr. Chad Hissong is going to be interviewing our Purdue Fort Wayne senior Jordan Mazurek. And so a little bit about Mr. Hissong. He has 20 years of successful public school administrative experience, including service in a middle school setting, a junior high, high school setting, a high school setting, and a central office setting. Prior to being an administrative, or prior to being an administrator, Mr. Hissong taught for 8 years at the middle junior high school level. And so they're going to interview for about the first 15 or 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a little bit of feedback, and then after we're going to open it up to discussion. So if you want to leave any questions in the chat bar, feel free to do that. Other than that, you're welcome to start your interview.
All right. Hey, thank you very much. That was very nice, Audrianna. Thank you. Jordan, good to see you today. Hope you're doing well. It's my understanding that today we're going to do a mock interview. You're going to be interviewing for a social studies position here at Snider High School. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you excited about this interview?
I am excited.
If you are nervous in any way, let that go, because this is a relaxed setting. We want all of our candidates to be very relaxed. We want you to be very comfortable. None of the questions are going to throw you a curveball. If I ask you a question you're not comfortable with, always ask me to clarify anything that you do not understand, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Your first question is, share a little about your teaching background and your student teaching experience.
Okay, so I just graduated from Purdue University Fort Wayne, and I have a Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education. So I don't have any current teaching experience, but for student teaching, student taught with Mr. Karsten Lockmuller at Carroll Middle School in a 6th grade social studies classroom. And that was a really good experience for me. He was able to let me pretty much right from my beginning experience there to just go in and start and lead the classes, plan lesson plans. We would collaborate often with that. He let me really, he basically introduced me to some of the students that I had to, like the IEPs, the students in the special ed, and clarified that with the special education department along with the ENL students. I was collaborating often with the other teachers, and especially the special ed teachers and the ENL teachers. So I had a really good experience there, despite it being cut short with schools being closed due to the COVID-19. But I also, along with, even though I don't have any formal teaching experience, I had a lot of field experience, especially through FWCS. I first observed at Wayne High School. I can't remember my cooperating teacher's name, but it was a U.S. history course. And then I observed at the alternative program where the old Nebraska elementary school used to be. And I was in the middle school and high school of that. So I was able to see a lot of different classroom settings along with being at a high school, also being in the alternative classroom with the smaller class sizes with both the middle school and the high school.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Great answer. Share with me up to 4 strategies that you have used or will use to effectively manage a classroom.
Well, so just 4, can you clarify the 4, like you want 4 different strategies listed, or?
Give me 4 different strategies. When you're having a difficult time with a rowdy group of students, how are you going to manage that group of students? What methods or what strategies are you going to use?
I think there's a lot of different methods that you could use. So at first, I think that you would tell them in class, you would just formally address them and say, to let them know, along with the other students know, that that's not okay behavior. We're trying to do this, and you need to make sure that you're paying attention. If that doesn't work, when I was student teaching especially, I would try to address them maybe after class more privately. Say, even in the hallway, if you're not able to get them, if they just run right out of class, which is at the 6th grade level they did, maybe just if you see them in the hallway, say, well, okay, this is what, just address them, and maybe they'll be able to, if they're not in front of a lot of their classmates, be more personable with you. Another strategy I used, if they just telling them no to stop or to not do that, would also be I had them like stand up while I'll say like, Joe, can you please stand up for a second? And they, at first, they think it's funny and the kids laugh, but after a while, they would say, okay. And then I'd say, okay, you can sit down. And then they would just um, be a lot better after that because I think doing that is just a lot of different ways to help them focus and allow not bring a lot of attention to just saying no, no, because obviously that's not working. Also collaborating with the other teachers, maybe if you're having a not able to use those methods, going to another teacher in your team and saying, hey, what is this is happening in my class? What is something that you've used? And being able to collaborate with them, and especially with student teaching at Northwest Allen. At Carroll, they always had collaboration at 8:15. The school day would start at 8:45. So we were able to build on those methods, and we did that often with the kids that they were having issues with or I was having issues with. We were able to collaborate there. So I would just use a variety of different methods to help address that.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Share with me up to 4 strategies or real life examples that you will use to motivate reluctant learners.
Reluctant learners and okay. Can you clarify that a little bit? Sorry.
So reluctant learner would be the student that's sitting in class, they didn't bring their textbook, they're not prepared for class, and they're just failing to engage. So what are you going to do to bring that student back to a learning place in their life where they can receive your instruction, they can do the work that you're asking them to do?
Okay. Thank you. I think also that's like similar to the last question where you could go and just talk to them personally one on one, maybe in the classroom or just off to the side if like they're doing something in class, just say, hey, like what's going on? Just try to form that relationship with them because then you're able to see what they're not overstepping personal boundaries, but also just saying like maybe if there's something going on outside of school, because a lot of the times, especially with the 6th grade level, they were having problems with their friends, or maybe something was happening at home, and being able to really manage that can help them to um, engage better. Another thing you could do maybe is reach out to a parent. I know that there's a lot of especially at Northwest Allen, I saw that there was a text or an email that they would do every week. They would say what we were doing each day, Monday through Friday, and what was going to be due, and maybe reaching out to the parent and say what's going on, and also trying to make sure there are good things that you can put into that email as well, saying that this is happening in the class and make sure it's positive and trying to reach out them, make sure they have access to Power School or Canvas, whatever online stuff that they do to manage the grades. Also, again, going back to the collaboration, you could collaborate with your teacher, maybe saying something that they have tried. Also, I could just try to, how you influencer owners just try to be excited about the content, maybe put positivity on it and trying to connect it to them. And that goes back to like forming those relationships, because if you can make it something that they can connect to, then they'll really like to do it. And I think a lot of that goes with making sure you don't have the same teaching style. So having like different visual methods as videos, watching them, tactile methods like simulations in classes, that can really influence those students that either don't are shy to do their homework and do the work and pay attention. If you just mix that up, that will help them to engage.
Very nice, thank you. Walk me through a typical class period from bell to bell.
Typical class period from bell to bell. So for the 6th grade, I used a lot of different, I planned it so we weren't doing the same thing every day. For social studies, being passionate about the subject in history, I recognize a lot of the students don't feel the same way as I do. So I could sit there and lecture and talk about that for a while, but I need to like make sure that they know like I'm mixing it up for them, especially at the middle school level that I was doing, even at the high school level, just making sure that um, making sure it's not just lecture, it's not just reading, it's videos. I noticed like YouTube is a huge source that I use for history because there's a lot of different things on there that the kids like. So I guess I would start by introducing. When I student taught, I always said, "Hi, how are you doing? How's today? How was your weekend?" We talked about the weekend just to build those relationships. And then I would go either like a video I'd show or we do the popcorn reading. I'd like lay out what we were doing. And on Mondays, especially, I would say, well, this is what we built on last week just to kind of refresh them. And then I'd say, this is what we're going to do today and lay out the week. And I would still do that throughout the week, especially if they had a test or a project that they were doing. I would make sure to do that. And then we'd go into the lesson if it'd start with a video or the reading. If they were doing independent work that day, like reading on their own or reading in groups, and do that. I would always try to also over plan because it's easy to plan a lesson and think you have enough, but also making sure you have enough time. So I would make sure, and then you can use those in other lessons too. And then I would probably end it by making sure I have good time management, make sure I'm watching the clock, that I'm not spending too much time on this or that. And then kind of concluding it as I was saying, or concluding it and making sure what's due, making sure I say, hey, you have homework, hey, your test is 2 days. So just introducing, making it a real comfortable classroom for every student.
Very nice. Thank you, Jordan. Now, what does equity mean to you, and how do you meet the needs of all students daily?
So equity means to me is, I've been saying this a lot in the interview, but forming the relationships and especially recognizing the differentiation in my classrooms. So when I student taught, my teacher gave me an introduction of, or not an introduction, but just told me which students were students with IEPs in the special education program, along with which students were in the ENL English language program. And making sure throughout doing that, making sure that those students were included and making sure that they all the projects or the assignments that we did that they were able to do that. There were a lot of times where I would have to modify an assignment. For one instance, because we were doing a primary source document and that was really difficult for the students, it was more challenging. But I had to accommodate because they were reading the Magna Carta versus the Bill of Rights, seeing the compare and contrast between that in Great Britain and the United States. And I had to accommodate that for the ENL students because they were trying to grasp it, but just with seeing theirs, I just had to accommodate them and make their assignment a little bit shorter. Not that they couldn't handle it, just making sure they were focusing on the stuff that I thought was most important for them to learn. I also, for review games, I made sure to, for a lot of the kids in the special ed program who were in the gen ed classrooms, I would pair them with a peer that was able to mentor them throughout the game. Like we had a Jeopardy game, make sure so those kids could motivate them and help them. And also when we were doing independent work, the kids in the special ed program would pair up. I'd say, how about you go work with this person? And that would help them to be able to do the assignment and understand it better. And also for the ENL students, I would pair the ones who are of higher on their ENL, their English level was higher. I would pair them with a lower, like their speaking level was not as good. Sorry, I said that poorly, but I would pair them so they would help mentor them because they felt that they were around their peers and they could motivate them to learn.
Nice, thank you. We'll wrap this up. Will this be our last question today, Jordan? Give me 4 ways you would go about building positive relationships with not only the internal stakeholders, but the external stakeholders as well.
So 4 ways. I would say the internal and external, are you saying, can you clarify that for me too? The internal, are you saying like the students and the staff, and then the external, the parents? Okay, just making sure.
Nice job.
Thank you. So the internal students, positive relations, I really think that just making sure that making sure your classroom is something for them to be. They can be themselves. They're willing to participate, and making sure you build that relationship on. Make sure that you recognize things like a student. I had a student for student teaching, first period, she was crying in my class, and I made sure I recognized it. Hey, what's going on? Do you want to talk to me about, and no, I don't want to talk to you. Oh, do you want to go down to the counselor and cool down, or do you want to do this? Yeah. So just making sure that they have that comfortability to talk to me. And then for the staff, just making sure that um, you're able to work well with them, and making sure, and that means going to those collaborative meetings, telling your experience, telling suggestions, and listening to them to make sure that they are able to, we are able to collaborate together and do the best to form those relationships in the classroom so the student can succeed. So collaboration with the staff, and then forming that relationship with the student. And then the external, I think, also is like forming the relationship, making sure that I would think if I was just with how technologically a lot of the stuff online is for students, making sure that the teacher has access to Power School, and make sure you have a regular email, maybe a weekly email to say what's going on, and if there is an issue, or also just not even if there is an issue, if there's a good thing. If a student did really good on this and participated well, make sure they know that. Along with making sure that for parent-teacher conferences, making sure that they know that all that stuff, they're welcome to that, and they're welcome to come in. For at Northwest Allen, they had in parent-teacher conferences that they set up in Monday. It was Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. They could set that. Make sure they know that, and making sure that you attend those and are prepared.
All right, thank you, Jordan. You did a very nice job. I think that concludes our time today.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you, Audrianna.
Okay, so now we'd just like to hear a little bit of feedback on how the interview went from you to Jordan. So.
Spectacular. Jordan, number one, it's the level of confidence that you displayed during the interview. That's what's going to sell you, and you did a very nice job. You were not reluctant in your responses. You, even when you struggled, you still continued to talk through it until you found what you wanted to say. And that's impressive, because a lot of times candidates will get into an interview and they'll get frustrated with themselves, or they'll get frustrated with the question itself because they won't know the correct answer. So you never struggled. Another thing, you ask questions. I always watch for candidates when they don't understand a question, whether or not they have the confidence to ask me. And you had the confidence to ask me to clarify. You had the confidence to ask me and say, okay, I don't quite understand what you're asking me. So that's perfect. One of the things I would suggest, never downplay your experience. Every experience that you've had in education is relevant to how you're going to perform in the classroom. So never say, well, I've only done student teaching. Refer to student teaching as the most important thing that happened in your life. Refer to all your field experiences as the most important things that happened in your life, and really focus on what those experiences. And one of the things you can do too is talk about maybe what you thought it was going to be like, and then what it was actually like when you got in there, and how it changed what you thought your practice was going to be. Because a lot of teachers, once we get into the game, we think we're going to do certain things. We think when we walk in that classroom, we're going to be certain people. But when we actually get there, it's a completely different game, because now we realize that sometimes teaching is all about survival. And so you got to do some crazy things to make sure you survive the classroom on a daily basis. I thought your answers were absolutely coherent. Loved it. Loved it. I've sat in interviews before where I'm listening to candidates. I don't even know where they're going. I can't even make a roadmap for their answers. And you, all your answers coherent. They were detailed. They were relevant. You nailed it. They were succinct. I was proud of you. Great answers, great responses. Now, another thing, don't be afraid when I'm asking questions. You did a nice job answering all the questions. And don't be afraid when people are asking questions to take notes. And don't be afraid to have notes with you. So certain names that you don't remember, maybe from a field experience, don't be afraid to have those notes with you on a small piece of paper or a small pad of paper. I've interviewed a lot of times, okay? I always bring notes to an interview with me. I always take notes during the interview, because even if I don't use the notes while I'm there, it helps my level of confidence and helps me, it reassures me that, hey, if I do get stuck, the answer's right there. Okay?
Yes, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we're going to open up to questions. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask Mr. Hissong about interviews, then feel free to leave them in the chat box, or you can unmute your device or raise your hand.
So, Brad, before you speak, before anybody asks a question, Jordan, the one thing I will do, I had a chance to look at your resume. With the exception that you graduated from Homestead High School, I'm not going to hold that against you, okay?
Not my fault.
You're interviewing with Snider, so I'm not. I did deduct maybe 2 points, but when you look at your resume, I want you to go back and rethink what you're highlighting in your resume and what you should highlight. Because when I look through your resume, you have your field experience in student teaching, and you really just kind of gloss over those. You say the school and you say the date. What I'm looking for as a principal is I see the field experience, and I want to know where the field experience was, and then I want to know particularly what subject area. So was it middle school? Was it sixth? Was it seventh? Was it eighth grade? Maybe reference the class sizes, maybe reference the diversity of the classroom, any detail that you can bring to make that experience more relevant tells me what your past experience has been. You talked about Nebraska. I spent a little tour of duty at Nebraska for a couple of months, helping it get back on track. Once again, great school. What a great experience. And in Nebraska is where you really see how relationships can impact instruction and impact the success of a student. And so really emphasize what you saw at each of those and what you learned from each of those experiences. And you can put that in your resume. Some of the other things, you have your past work experiences. On those past work experiences, I always tell candidates, especially candidates that I coach, that only when you want to really show off is the things that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. So really not relevant to applying for this teaching job, minimize those. Take those down. Yes, those are relevant experiences. However, it's not really as important as what you have done in the classroom. That's where you really want to stand out, particularly your student teaching. With no teaching experience, with teaching background up to this point, don't downplay that in the interview. But in your resume, say, hey, I did my student teaching. This is where I did my student teaching. These were the type of students I had. This was the classroom I was in. Talk about the experience, the years of experience the supervising teacher had, because that's important, because that tells me whether that was a great classroom experience, a great student teaching experience, or whether it might have been rocky, because sometimes we're very careful. Dr. Oliver and Dr. Cirque will tell you, I'm very careful about who I place student teachers with, because I want it to be a positive learning experience. However, not all principals have that approach. Sometimes they'll drop you in a classroom where basically they want you to teach that teacher how to be a better teacher. And so that's relevant to me when I'm looking at that resume to see, okay, were you just surviving, trying to stand and hang on beside another teacher who was also struggling, or did you have a great student teaching? Okay.
Yeah. So do you recommend putting because you said to put the number of students and the differentiation, the diversity and stuff. Do you recommend on my resume doing it kind of how I've written my job experience, saying, so just making that more in detail and minimizing the job experience. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, because in reality, and this is why I have to tell people, these became, when you did the field experience and when you did the student teaching, those became your job related experiences. And so often we downplay it, and I'm guilty of this as well. I remember my first interview back, I'm not even gonna tell you what year, but I remember downplaying it and my principal looking at me and telling me, that experience that you're talking about is the most relevant experience you have to the job that you're asking me to give you. So you can't downplay that experience. You should be talking about that experience and its relevancy and how important that experience was to how or what you have become as a teacher and how it's impacted your practice. Because just like doctors, attorneys, engineers, architects, our practice evolves. The teacher we are, and I share this with my teachers every year, the teachers we are on day one at the beginning of the school year is not who we are on day 180. The teacher we are in year one is not the teacher we are in year 5. It's not the teacher we are in year 10, because our practice is constantly evolving. And when your practice stops evolving, that's a bad sign, because that means that because our kids are changing constantly. They're constantly changing. They're becoming significantly more technologically. I mean, they rely heavily on their technology. I'm talking to you, as a matter of fact. You rely heavily on our technology. And so as a result, if we don't accentuate and use that as a strength in the classroom, because you're Chad Hissong and you're really, really old and you're not used to and you're not comfortable with technology, that's not connecting on that level that where the student is. So it's so important that we continue to evolve as an instructor. And so you evolved in that time that you student taught. The first 3 months, you will evolve as an instructor. The next 3 months, you will evolve as an instructor. So I always share with my teachers, because they get a big kick out of this. I always tell them, my first year of teaching, I thought I was the absolute best teacher on earth. Man, I walked out of that room on day 181 and I said, these kids are so lucky to have had me as an instructor. Thank God they had Mr. Hissong, because I don't know what their lives would have been like if they wouldn't have had me for a year. Then I went back to my second year and I started teaching, and I looked at all the mistakes I made my first year and I said, oh my God, I feel like I've committed an injustice to those kids. I need to go back and reteach them, because my whole practice was evolving as I saw weaknesses and as I saw strengths in my practice. So you're going to feel that exact same thing. So when you're talking about that student teaching experience, talk about that evolution of what your expectations were going in, what actually happened, and then what was the result? How did it impact your practice?
Yeah, because it's really nothing like I expected it. So I have a lot to talk about with that. So I'll definitely make sure I do that and add that to my resume. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Any questions? Any other questions?
Hey, Mr. Hissong, Brad Oliver, just want to ask you to elaborate a little bit too, since we have you, about the process. This mock interview is probably more what they would expect in a first round interview. Can you just talk from the standpoint of Fort Wayne Community Schools? Is there a second round interview? If a candidate's advanced, do they interview with central office? Would anything change? Should they expect to pivot in any way in how they respond to questions as the process goes deeper and further, and perhaps a second round interview?
Absolutely. Hey, that's a great question, Mr. Oliver. The neat thing about Fort Wayne Community Schools is we make our decisions for our instructors at the building level. So if you're applying for an instructional position at Fort Wayne Community Schools, if I have a social studies opening and you interview and apply with me, I am the first interview and I am the final interview. So you will only interview with me. And usually what I do is I include, I have quite a few people on my team at Snider High School. So I have 2 assistant principals who are considered 260-day assistant principals, which means they're my right hand. So basically what they are, they're principals in waiting for that opportunity to apply to middle school or high school to be a principal. And my responsibility is to make sure that when they get to that position that they're successful. And then I have a guidance director. So when we do an interview, usually those 3 people are involved in that interview. It's usually 10 questions, 10, 11 questions. We give you the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So always make sure, and Jordan, I realized today we didn't have time for you to ask questions, but always make sure you have some questions. And the reason I say that is because principals have different characteristics. We have different expectations. I have a reputation for being more of a student-friendly principal, and I'm hard on teachers because I push teachers hard. There are other principals who have a different reputation. They're easy on teachers, but hard on students. There's some principals who have they're hard on everybody. So make sure that when you're interviewing that I'm the right fit for you. And a lot of teachers will tell you, whether or not, hey, I couldn't work for that guy, but when I came over here, I was really successful. So that you asking questions is just as important as me interviewing you, because you need to get to know the person that you're going to be working for. So that interview, what happens after the interview then is we continue with all the other candidates. And then when we get to the end, if we have 2 candidates that are relatively close and are scoring, we'll schedule a second interview. And the neat thing about Fort Wayne Community Schools right now, we just adopted a new online program. So I can schedule all my interviews via email, and we're doing them all on Zoom. And it's a quick process because you can pick the date and time of your interview. I give you a window, you pick the date and time, I Zoom with you on that date and time, and we do your interview. We may do a second interview, we may not. It may be a situation where I call you and I say, hey, at this time, we're offering you the position. And you usually have anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to send me an email, either saying that you're accepting my recommendation for the position or you're declining my recommendation for the position. If you accept, then it moves into human resources. I click that I'm recommending you for the job. And then that process begins with a pre-employment meeting where you complete some more paperwork. You'll identify all the people that are your references. And I begin the reference check process, and then the whole process of hiring begins. Usually we try to hire all of our teachers between May and June. So the only situation that happens, and this is where for you folks who are just graduating, the one thing you got to be cognizant of, if you don't get a job, say you apply for a job with me at Snider High School, you have to realize that you may be competing against other teachers from Fort Wayne Community Schools. So there might be a social studies teacher from Northside High School who also applies for that position. But continue to watch, because when that Northside teacher comes to Snider, they just vacated that Northside position. And so you can then apply for the Northside position, and you just keep applying, because we may bounce teachers around. We bounce teachers all over this district. I left Northside a few years ago. I have Northside teachers here with me now. When I left Elmhurst 10 years ago, my Elmhurst teachers, a lot of those folks came with me to Northside. So it's one of those situations where when you find a good principal fit for yourself, you try to align yourself with that principal, and you might follow them for a while. And my teachers have told me to stop moving. They said, we're done now. We're staying here. So it's the process in itself for us. I feel like it takes a long time. But the interview process and that part of it goes really fast, and the recommendation occurs pretty quickly. But then the hiring process through human resources sometimes a little bit longer.
I have a question. I just applied for a position at Fort Wayne Community Schools. I guess it wasn't at Snider, but do they sent my teacher from my cooperating teacher at Carroll Middle School a questionnaire. Is that an automatic thing that they do? Okay, because I wasn't sure, because I hadn't heard anything back yet, so I wasn't sure if it was just busy right now with all the new hiring and like the school ending with everything being taught from home, or if I should be reaching out to them or.
Don't panic yet. Right now, it's been a little crazy here in community schools, because we just wrapped up teacher cleanup days, and a lot of the schools now are engaged in students coming in and cleaning out their lockers. So during the day, it's kind of hard sometimes, depending on the number of volunteers we have, to be able to do interviews. So never panic. The process of checking your references is automatic. So once you list them as a reference, they automatically get the questionnaire, which if your reference has already returned it, that's absolutely phenomenal, because sometimes that holds up the process. And then it's up to the principal to make that contact. And like I said, I use the automated version from our new web-based program. Some principals are still old school, where they'll still call you and schedule that interview. But once again, never panic, because if they're interviewing right now, say they're interviewing a group of teachers right now, by that teacher getting hired, it's vacating another position somewhere, which means another job is going to post and another job is going to be open. And I tell teachers all, especially young folks, never panic. In September, that's time to panic, but realize that we're hiring all the way up until September. And sometimes I'm still hiring in October and November. Yeah. So, and that's because of what we call the Super Bowl effect, because what happens is when one person has an opening and other people from the district apply, and then it just continues a Super Bowl until everybody gets settled back in and everybody gets in place. So
you just recommend checking the website for postings. Just keep doing that, because that's what I've been doing, just checking through it every day to make sure. And if there is a position, right when I saw it, I applied. So I was just, is there anything else just you recommend for me to do?
Absolutely. One of the things I would recommend that you do, and this is for all you folks, is if you know principals, for instance, if you have a relationship with a principal, if I'm applying for a position, I have a relationship with Mr. Oliver, the one thing I want Mr. Oliver to do is reach out. And it's as simple as sending an email. Mr. Oliver knows Chad Hissong. Mr. Oliver said, hey, I got a candidate applying for a job at Snider. Mr. Oliver, will you reach out to Chad to make sure I get an interview? Will you reach out to tell him, hey, look at my paperwork. I really want to get an interview. Use your relationships. Use your networking, because that is the key, especially when you start applying for jobs. Remember, I was at Hamilton Southeastern for 10 years. When you're applying for jobs at Hamilton Southeastern High School or Hamilton Southeastern schools in general, you're up against 150 candidates. So if nobody is making that call for you, the likelihood that anybody's going to look at your paperwork is very low. So you have to take advantage of your network. You have to take advantage of your friends, family, whoever knows that person. Find out and then make sure they're making a call or sending an email for you.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have one question from the comments, and that is, do you use scenarios in your interviews?
I have used scenarios in the past. I think, and we use a question bank in Fort Wayne Community Schools. I do not think we have any current scenarios as any of our questions. The only scenario we had is the what's your classroom look like from start to finish, from bell to bell. So that's the only scenario. As far as doing a situation where we say Billy is sitting in class, Billy throws a ball and hits Jimmy in the head. How are you going to respond to that? We don't do that.
Are there any more questions? Okay. I think that about wraps it up. So thank you, Mr. Hissong and Jordan, for our mock interview guinea pigs. And yeah, if there's any more questions, feel free to email Kappa Delta Pi, and we will get back to you. But other than that, have a nice day, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Hissong.
You're welcome. You take care.
Yep. Bye.
Here, guys.